Hi, my name is Guok. Today I will be talking about the impact of roads on wildlife. First off, roads are an important and major part of a lot of people's lives throughout the world. It helps us get from destination A to destination B in a safe manner. They connect our cities and towns, allowing us to travel through mountains and forests quickly and efficiently. According to the Federal Highway Administration, the United States alone has about 4 million miles of roadway. There are obviously a lot of pros to having roads created for humans. However, today I'll be focusing primarily on how roads are impacting wildlife. Unfortunately, the impact of it are mostly negative. There are three main points that I would like to illustrate for my presentation: habitat loss, mortality rate, and overall habitat quality. Roads have a direct impact on the habitat of wildlife since the landscape itself is being transformed in a way that makes it more accessible and convenient for humans to use. For example, here we see a demolition of a forest habitat being destroyed. Trees being cut down and the ground being paved across landscapes are intersecting through ecosystems and local habitats. All of this equates to habitat loss. Instead of having grassy or foresty land, we now have just pavement that is used for human vehicles. Animals cannot live on pavement or use it for protection or use it to hunt or anything else that's useful for their own lives. This also means there is going to be less habitable space for the wildlife. With less space, animals have to compete with one another for limited space. Certain animals are now also at a higher risk from predators who also lost their natural habitat. All of this can have a devastating chain effect on the ecosystem. With all of these trees and plants being cut down, this doesn't just have a chain effect on animals, but the rest of the ecosystem as a whole. The destroyed vegetation means more carbon dioxide emissions are being released into the air from vehicles that are cutting down the trees, the same trees that are helping in removing carbon dioxide from the air. Having roads built leads to habitat fragmentation. What was once just an area covered in natural forest habitat is now divided by the construction of a road paved through the forest. The road acts as a barrier, creating what was once a large habitat into two smaller habitats. This occurrence is known as habitat fragmentation. Habitat fragmentation causes a lot of issues for the wildlife. Animals that initially need a large patch of space are at risk of having their way of life ruined since their habitat space have been significantly reduced. Species that are negatively affected by this habitat fragmentation are normally referred to as interior habitat species. Since their main habitat is on the inside of the forest, and the opposite type of this are referred as edge habitat species. Normally, these species here thrive on harsher environments compared to their interior counterparts. Because of all this, habitat fragmentation could cause a great decrease to the interior species, but cause a greater increase to the edge species. Even though one side has an advantage to this effect, overall this is a bad thing for the ecosystem because of the unbalanced biodiversity that this leads, having an abundance of edge species and a sparse amount of interior species. Having an abundance of an edge habitat has a noticeable chain effect on the ecosystem. If there's too much of an edge habitat, it becomes too inviting for invasive species that thrive on harsher living conditions, driving out species that are more interior habitat that requires something more specific. For example, a road built through a forest can result in a weedy plant species thriving adjacent to the road with extra sunlight. This weed could extend and take up space from other types of vegetation with less varied vegetation. Animals that rely on feeding on such vegetation must now compete for more limited resources. If there are less herbivores around to have these resources, that also means there's going to be less food for the carnivores that use those species as a source of food. And then with less carnivores, there could also be mean too much of an abundance for a specific type of species. The main type of species that thrive in these type of environment would lead to that of an invasive kind, which again would mean a decrease in biodiversity. Less biodiversity would also lead towards more species being extinct. This type of habitat fragmentation leads to animals being stuck on one side of the road and cannot cross to the other. And animals that can't cross the other lose out on their resources like food and water. It also interrupts their migration path and lessens the gene pool since they are unable to reach a larger pool of breeding mates, which leads to a loss of genetic diversity. Lowering genetic diversity causes animals to become more vulnerable to diseases and less able to adapt to changes to the future. Therefore, inbreeding becomes the next available option, which could lead to a noticeable hand to species extinction. Can you imagine how difficult and confusing it must be as an animal relying on a migration or seasonal route only to have that path completely change and now filled with dangers that you don't recognize? If they are too afraid to cross the road, they are then separated off from a wide area of their original habitat that they no longer have access to. This can mean missing members from their population for survival and mating, or missing out on a natural resource like, again, food and water. So, because of this barrier effect placed by the road pavement, animals are stuck with either the option to continue inbreeding, which of course leads to the quality of life being lower, or risk their immediate lives just to cross the road. Animals are put in a situation where they have to take an extremely high risk just to get to the other side of the road, thus increasing the mortality rate of these animals because of roads. According to an article done at Nottingham Trent University, roadkill was found to be on the most common cause of death in almost a third of all populations studied, leading ahead of causes such as disease and hunting. Across some populations, some animals, up to 80% of known mortality rates, were due to the results of collision with motor vehicles. Animals that are slow moving have an extremely difficult time crossing the road. Here, for example, we have turtles and salamander, which are at a high risk of being roadkill since they are on the road for too long. The longer they are on the pavement, the more likely they are to be hit, especially since their visibility are also quite low to oncoming traffic. Now, you might think that only small critters are in danger of roadkill, but that's not the case because large carnivores, like bears and mountain lions, are also very vulnerable to roadkill as well. They are wide-ranging creatures, so they have to routinely cross a lot of roads, and unfortunately, this leads to them being at a high risk of getting hit by motor vehicles. Unfortunately, even birds are affected by roadkill. Birds such as pheasants and turkeys are quite slow-moving and unable to fly out of the way quickly enough to avoid oncoming traffic. Even for birds that can fly, they too are prone to vehicle collisions since they have to fly near the ground level to pick up at the trees and plants that contain fruit or nutrients for them. Outside of even traversing to the other side of the road, the overall habitat quality is still much lower because of all the pollution and disturbance that the road creates. Roads can degrade the soil it was initially paved on, rainwater can erode the exposed soil of dirt roads, carrying it downstream, which would then lead to polluting the stream itself. Roads were meant to travel by humans that use motor vehicles. Motor vehicles are usually loud. These loud noises, especially on a busy road, creates a disturbance to the habitat that are close by the road and prevent animals such as birds from communicating with each other properly. Roads attract so much pollution for the habitat that the road is built on. Wildlife inhabitants have to worry about noise pollution, light pollution, air pollution, and even physical pollution like debris and trash. At night, for humans to drive safely, they have to drive with their headlights on or have guidance from streetlights, which can be very distracting and invasive for animals on the side of the road, especially for nocturnal species. Most cars also emit a lot of smog and pollutes the air quality nearby. There are also a high rate of man-made trash in the wildlife, where roads are presented due to people littering outside of the car or from accidents happening that don't get fully cleaned up. So what can we do? What are we supposed to do about all these issues that road creates? Since roads are essential to many humans in the world, we have to do our best with the reward and cost benefits of having roads. We can make more of an effort and collaborate with conservation experts to make sure roads are being built to be as non-invasive as possible. By having better road planning and designs, we can minimize the impact that these roads are causing on wildlife, avoiding high-value areas for the wildlife habitat. We can incorporate better fencing to ensure animals don't venture off into any area where they shouldn't be. We should also be implementing more wildlife corridors and overpasses to help animals cross any fragmented habitats so they may safely get across to the other side of the road. By having better practices to roads being built, we can help ensure that the benefits that we receive of having roads can come that much closer to outweighing the cost of wildlife loss. This concludes my presentation. I hope I was able to bring you guys a balance of entertainment and urgency to this topic. I think it is important that we, at the very least, are educated about this topic to help be a part of of the bigger goal in preserving the world for our future generations to come. If you wish to learn more about this topic, here are some links to the sources that I've used. They contain much more in-depth analysis of road impacts on wildlife and contain some data gathered on correlating roads to wildlife mortality rate. Thank you for listening.